Wyoming Territory, August 1879. The sun beat down hard on the dusty main street of Rawlins, where a crowd had gathered near the courthouse steps. Two young girls, no more than 10 and 12, stood side by side, their dresses tattered, hands clutched tight. A rusted sign hung behind them that read, "Town Auction Orphaned Property." But it was not land or livestock on display, it was them. Talia O'Brien's stomach twisted as she watched from the shadow of the mercantile's awning. She had just stepped off the westbound train that morning, a battered leather bag slung over her shoulder, and a letter from her late uncle's lawyer still folded in her pocket. She had not expected this. Not in a town where her family had once lived, not in front of so many people. The sheriff barked loud and clear. 2 orphaned girls, no kin left. Judge approved the sale for caretaking rights, starting bid $100. A few men shifted uncomfortably. One woman gasped, most just stared. Talia's throat went dry. She recognized the older girl by the set of her jaw. That was Josephine O'Brien, Josie, her cousin's daughter. Talia had not seen her since she was a baby. The younger one stood closer, trembling. Julia, Josie's little sister. Their mother had died of fever just last month, no father in sight. "And now this, anyone?" the sheriff pressed, still silence. Then boots hit the dirt. A tall cowboy stepped through the crowd, the kind of man who drew attention without trying. Dust clung to his coat and his shirt hung open at the collar. His hat shadowed his face, but when he looked up, Talia saw clear eyes the color of the sky before a storm. "I will pay," he said, whispers rippled. The sheriff squinted. "You sure, son? Full sum?" The cowboy nodded. "Everything?" Talia stepped forward without thinking. "Wait," all eyes turned to her. "I know those girls," she said, voice steady even as her heart pounded. "They are my family." The cowboy looked at her, really looked. "You kin, I am their cousin," she said. "Talia O'Brien, I came to take them." The sheriff scratched his temple. "You got proof?" She pulled the letter from her pocket, hands shaking now. The sheriff read it, squinting hard. "Says here you're next of kin, but you came late. Law's already in motion." "I can take them," Talia said. "I have a place, I will care for them." The sheriff hesitated. But the cowboy stepped forward again, pulling a thick leather wallet from his coat. "Let her take them," he said quietly. "I will pay the fee regardless. Let it be done." "No," Talia said, turning to him. "You do not need to do that." He met her gaze. "Yes, I do," the sheriff grumbled, but finally nodded. "Fine, girls go with the cousin. Payment made." The 2 girls ran to Talia, clutching her waist, burying their faces into her sides. She held them tight, her chest aching. The crowd began to drift away, muttering, the drama over. The cowboy turned to leave. "Wait," Talia called. He stopped. "I do not know your name." He tipped his hat back, revealing sun-warmed skin, a fresh scar on his jaw, and a worn expression that matched her own grief. "Lachlan Langston." She stepped closer. "Thank you, Lachlan. You looked like you were going to fall apart," he said softly, "so I stepped in." "I would have found a way," he nodded. "I believe you." Josie tugged on Talia's sleeve. "Can we leave now?" Talia looked down at both girls. "Yes." "We will find something better." They started down the dirt road, past the saloon and the blacksmith's forge, toward the edge of town, where a small boarding house stood waiting. Talia glanced back once, expecting Lachlan to be gone, but he was still there, watching. 3 days later, Talia found herself sitting on the porch of the boarding house, arms sore from scrubbing floors, hair damp from the heat. Josie and Julia slept inside, curled together like kittens. They had not let go of her since the auction. A shadow fell across the steps. "You still here?" Lachlan asked. She looked up. "We have nowhere else." He walked closer, hitching his horse to the rail. "You planning to stay in Rawlins?" "I do not know. I have a cabin," he said. "North of town, land's good, needs fixing, but there is room." Talia blinked. "Why are you telling me this?" He scratched his neck. "Because you have 2 girls to raise. Because you look like you have not eaten in a day, and because I do not like the thought of you in a place where men watch children get auctioned like they were cattle." Her voice caught. "You do not know me." "I know enough." She hesitated. "You offering charity?" "No," he said. "I am offering help. You choose what to call it." Talia looked back at the door where the girls slept, then she looked back at him. "Let me think." He nodded and touched the brim of his hat. "You know where to find me." She did not sleep much that night. The next morning, she packed their things. They rode out at dawn. The cabin sat on high ground, overlooking a stretch of valley that shimmered green with late summer grass. A barn leaned slightly westward, and the house needed paint. But the wind smelled like pine and earth. And for the first time since she had stepped off that train, Talia felt like she could breathe. Lachlan stood by the fence, hammer in hand, shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked surprised to see her. "You came." "I did," he nodded. "You and the girls can stay in the house. I will move to the barn." "No," she said, "we will figure it out." He looked at her for a long moment. "You sure?" She nodded. "I would rather be here than anywhere else." For the first time he smiled, not big, not flashy, just soft and real. "Me too," he said. That night she tucked the girls into clean beds. She stepped out onto the porch, the stars spread thick above the hills. Lachlan sat at the edge, whittling something small and curved. She sat beside him. "You did not have to do what you did," she said. "I know, but I am glad you did." He looked at her then, eyes warm. "So am I." Their shoulders touched, neither of them moved away. By late September, the wind had sharpened and the mornings came silver with frost. Talia rose before the girls each day, stirring the stove with stiff fingers, coaxing flame into the cold. The cabin creaked with the season's shift, its boards swelling and settling like it had breath. She'd found a rhythm in the small tasks, hauling water from the pump, mending sleeves worn thin, teaching Josie and Julia to read by the light of an oil lamp. There was peace in the structure of it, in the quiet repetition that asked nothing more of her than presence. Lachlan never lingered indoors. He rose early, worked late, and only came into the house when invited. Yet his presence lived in every corner, tools he'd left by the porch railing, the way the woodpile never ran low, a new latch he'd carved for the broken barn door. One evening, after supper had settled and the girls chased moths on the porch, Talia stepped out with 2 tin cups of chicory. Lachlan stood by the gate, coat collar turned up, watching the dark come in over the hill. She handed him the cup. "You always stand like that with your back to the house." He took it without looking at her. "I listen to see if it sounds like it should, and does it?" He sipped. "Tonight it does." She leaned against the post beside him, both of them quiet for a while. The girls' laughter drifted, soft as wind in grass. "You lived alone out here a long time?" she asked. "Since I came back," he said. She turned. "From where?" His jaw worked once. "South of Fort Worth, rode with a freight company. Before that, I was down past San Marcos." "Before that, Missouri?" She nodded slowly. "You move like a man who's had to start over more than once." He looked at her then. "And you move like a woman who's afraid she won't get to start at all." The words hit something in her chest she hadn't named out loud. She looked away. "I'm not afraid of the work," she said. "I just don't know what kind of life I'm building yet." Lachlan set his cup on the fence rail. "Maybe it builds around you, bit by bit." Josie called from the porch. "The lantern's out." Talia turned toward the house. "Be there in a minute." Lachlan didn't move. "You trust me with them yet?" She hesitated. "If I didn't, I wouldn't be standing out here." His voice lowered. "That's not the same as yes." "No," she said. "It's not." He gave a single nod. "Fair enough." The next morning, snow dusted the ridge like sifted flour. The girls pressed their noses to the window, breath fogging the panes. Talia wrapped their feet in extra wool and sent them to gather kindling from the lean-to. She found Lachlan in the barn, mending a saddle strap with careful fingers. "You ever taught children?" she asked, stepping over a coil of rope. He glanced up. "Not once. They're learning their letters, but Josie needs more than I can give her. She's holding too much in." "She talked to you?" "Only when Julia's asleep. Even then, not much." He set the leather aside. "What do you want from me?" "Take her riding. Just once. She watches you from the porch, though she pretends not to." He leaned back against a post. "You think a horse will fix what's inside her?" "No," she said, "but it might give her a place to put it down." He nodded once. "I'll take her after noon." When the sun stood highest, Josie climbed up behind Lachlan on the sorrel mare, her hands clutched too tight at first. Julia watched from the porch wrapped in a quilt, her eyes following the trail until they disappeared over the rise. Talia sat beside her, knitting slow, her fingers stiff. By dusk they returned. Josie's cheeks were flushed and her mouth curled at the edges like it hadn't in weeks. She didn't speak, but when she passed Talia on the way inside, she touched her sleeve gently. That night, after the girls were asleep, Talia brought out the chessboard her uncle had carved years ago. She set it on the table and lit the lamp. Lachlan raised an eyebrow when he saw it. "You play, I win," she said, pulling out a chair. He sat across from her, the fire behind them casting long shadows on the wall. Halfway through the game, she asked, "Why didn't you speak up at the courthouse sooner, before I did?" He moved his knight without hesitation. "Because I didn't want to take them," she looked up sharply. "I wanted to stop what was happening," he said, "but I didn't want to live with what came after, not until I saw you." She stared at the board. "You thought I'd fall apart. I thought you'd fight for them." She moved her bishop. "You were right." He looked at her like the board didn't matter. "You still are." The game ended with her victory, though barely. He stood to leave, but hesitated at the door. "Talia," he said quietly, "next time you need something, ask me." She nodded. "I will." The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time in months she slept through the night. By mid-October, the earth had hardened beneath a skin of frost, and the cottonwoods along the creek had dropped their last leaves. The days shortened, but there was steadiness in the way they passed, measured, quiet, and full of shared labor. Talia spent mornings teaching the girls from the old primer she'd found at the bottom of her uncle's trunk, while Lachlan repaired the windmill gears that clattered in the night. Come afternoon, they worked side by side in the root cellar, sorting potatoes by size and checking the apples for rot. The air down there was always damp, always still. One evening, as sunlight pooled low across the hills, Lachlan joined her by the fence line where she was twisting wire taut between posts. She didn't speak at first, her gloves creaking as she pulled against the tension. "Fence looks good," he said. "It's not straight," she replied. "This post leans." He stepped in, bracing the wood with his shoulder while she hammered. "You ever done fence work before?" "No," she said, "but I watched my father do it once. He cursed the whole time." Lachlan chuckled. "That's the proper way." They worked in rhythm until the last staple was driven in. The sun slipped low behind the ridge, staining the sky with long bands of amber. As they stood back, Talia brushed her hair away from her face with a forearm streaked in dust. "You've got good hands for work like this." He flexed his fingers once. "They've broken more than they've built, but I keep trying." She looked at him, really looked, as if seeing something new. "What broke them?" He hesitated before answering. "A man I followed too far and a cause that wasn't mine." She didn't press. The wind stirred between them, brittle with the coming cold. He shifted slightly. "You miss the East." "I miss quiet libraries," she said, "and ink that doesn't freeze in the bottle, but no one looked me in the eye there. Here they have to. You want to go back. I want to stay where I'm needed." They stood in silence, the fence stretching behind them in a crooked line. Then Lachlan reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden carving, a bird, wings just folding. "I made this for Julia." She left her rag doll out in the snow, and it's gone soft with mold. Talia took the carving, turning it gently in her palm. "You notice things?" "I try." She looked up at him. "She'll love it." The next morning, she found Josie outside, sitting alone on the porch rail with her boots unlaced. "You're up early," Talia said, pulling her shawl tighter. Josie didn't look up. "I had a dream." "Want to tell me?" Josie hesitated. "Mama was there. She was planting seeds in the snow." Talia sat beside her. "That doesn't work too well, does it?" "No," Josie said. But she smiled like she thought it would. They were quiet a long while. "Do you think people stay nearby after they're gone?" Josie asked, voice small. "I think love doesn't leave," Talia said. "It just changes shape." Josie nodded once, then got up and went inside. That afternoon, Lachlan brought back 2 rabbits slung from his saddle. Talia was gutting them behind the barn when he approached with a length of canvas and a tin of salt. "You ever use traps?" he asked. "Not since I was a girl," she said. "But I remember how." He crouched beside her, laying out the tools. "We can set a line near the creek. I saw fox tracks there." She wiped her hands on her apron. "You always carry salt, old habit," he said. "Kept me fed when coin didn't." As they worked, she glanced up. "You ever think about settling? I'm here, ain't I?" "No," she said. "I mean staying with people, not just land." He met her eyes. "I've thought about it more lately." Her breath caught in her chest, though she kept her hands moving. That evening, Julia clutched the carving to her chest and fell asleep with her arms curled around it. Josie traced letters in the margin of a newspaper with a stub of graphite, lips moving silently. Talia stepped outside once the house was quiet. Lachlan sat on the porch, sharpening a blade by the dim light of a lantern. She lowered herself beside him. "I'm not afraid of being alone," she said. He looked at her, the whetstone pausing in his hand. "I didn't think you were, but I don't want to be either." Not now. The wind rose, dry leaves skittering across the yard. "There's room here," he said finally, "not just in the house, in my days." She reached out and took the blade from his hand, setting it aside. "I don't need saving," she said. "I know, but I need someone who stays." "I will." She leaned into him then, her shoulder against his, and he wrapped his arm around her without hesitation. They sat like that until the moon cleared the trees. Inside, the girls slept in the soft hush of home. And outside, something long guarded between two people had finally been offered and taken. The first hard freeze came in the second week of November. The ground stiffened underfoot, and the creek behind the cabin slowed to a brittle trickle beneath thin sheets of ice. Talia kept the girls indoors most days now, their time divided between stitching patchwork squares and reading aloud from the borrowed almanac Lachlan had traded a trapline pelt for in town. By then, the cabin had taken on the shape of them. Josie's boots left dried mud scuffs by the hearth, Julia's drawings curled under the weight of stones on the windowsill. The scent of dried sage lingered in the rafters from the bundle Talia had hung to dry. Even the air felt quieter, like the house was holding its breath. Lachlan had built a henhouse before the ground turned too hard, a low, sturdy thing with slanted walls and a door Josie painted bright red with leftover barn paint. The girls named every hen, though none of them laid yet. One morning, as Talia swept pine needles from the cabin floor, Lachlan came through the door with a cracked piece of slate tucked under one arm and his coat dusted in frost. "Found this near the old Claim Road," he said, setting the slate on the table. "Used to be part of a schoolhouse wall. Thought maybe it'd be useful." Talia brushed her hands on her apron and touched the stone's edge. "You carry rocks now, only the ones that matter," she smiled before she could stop herself. "You ever learn your letters?" "Some," he said. "Enough to read a map and not get cheated in a game of cards." She pulled out a stub of chalk from the drawer. "Then sit. You're not leaving until you can spell something longer than your name." He pulled out a chair. "You always this bossy?" "Only when I'm right." They worked through the afternoon, the girls whispering nearby as Lachlan stumbled through syllables with quiet frustration. He didn't give up, not once, and when he finally spelled shelter without help, Talia didn't praise him. She just passed him a cup of warm cider and let their elbows brush as they drank. Later that week, a letter arrived from a woman in Cheyenne who had known the girl's mother. Talia read it aloud by lantern light, her voice steady as she translated the neat script. The woman wrote of a time when their mother had sung in the church choir, how she'd once sewn a wedding dress for a schoolteacher who couldn't afford lace. Josie sat very still as the words filled the room. When the letter ended, Julia asked, "Did she ever talk about us?" Talia folded the paper with care before answering. "She did. She said you were her beginning again." Josie looked at the fire. "I want to remember her voice." "You will," Lachlan said, "not all at once. Pieces'll come back." That night, Talia found herself unable to sleep. She stepped out into the yard, wrapping her shawl tighter, and found Lachlan by the corral, oiling the saddle leather by moonlight. He didn't look up as she approached. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Never do easy when the wind changes." She leaned on the fence beside him. "You always work when you're restless," he nodded once. "Hands need something to do when the mind won't sit still." She watched the quiet motion of his cloth against the leather. "You've done more for us than I ever expected." "I didn't do it for thanks. I didn't say thank you. Didn't have to." They stood there a long while, the cold settling around them like a second skin. Eventually, she said, "I used to think love was something loud. Shouting from balconies, chasing trains. But now I think it's quieter than that." His voice was low. "It's the things you don't walk away from." She turned to him, eyes searching his face. "Are you going to stay?" He met her gaze. I already have. She stepped close then, close enough that her breath stirred the collar of his coat. When she leaned forward, it wasn't sudden. It felt like the next thing in a long line of small, honest choices. He met her halfway, one hand at the back of her neck, and the kiss was slow, steady, and sure. Like the way a fire catches when it's been tended long and right. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. I've known worse years, he said. She laughed softly. I've known worse men. His thumb brushed the edge of her jaw. You won't know any more of them, she nodded. Good. Inside, the girls slept soundly. In the dark, the wind shifted, but the cabin held fast. And out under the stars, love settled into the bones of the place, not loud or showy, but rooted. Like something that had been there all along, just waiting to be named. The morning thaw came slow, the sun pulling mist from the fields like steam off a kettle. Talia stepped into the yard with a basket on her hip, her boots sinking just slightly in the softening ground. A blue jay called from the trees beyond the barn, sharp and sudden, and somewhere out in the distance. A coyote barked once before fading back into the hills. Inside the cabin, Josie helped Julia braid her hair, fingers gentle, face focused. Neither girl spoke much anymore of what had been lost, not because they'd forgotten, but because there was finally more to hold on to than grief. Lachlan was already in the pasture, checking the fence line on foot. He wasn't riding much now, not unless the task called for it. He said he liked the pace of walking, said it let him notice things he used to miss. Talia believed him. He noticed everything these days, how the stove drew better when the back window was cracked. How Julia slept easier with a quilt tucked just so under her shoulder. How Talia winced when she bent too quickly. She reached him where the fence curved beside a stand of bare chokecherry trees. He was crouched low, examining a snapped wire. Looks like a mule deer pushed through, he said, not looking up. Talia passed him the basket. I brought bread and apples. He stood, taking it with a nod. You always bring too much. I never hear you complain. He tore off a piece of crust and chewed slowly, his eyes still scanning the tree line. There's something I've been thinking on, she said. He glanced at her then, waiting. I want to build something behind the cabin, a small shed. For drying herbs, storing preserves come spring, he swallowed. That's a good idea. We'll need a proper roof and shelves. I can manage most of it, she said, but I'll need your help with the frame. I'd help even if you didn't ask. She folded her arms, squinting toward the cabin. It's starting to feel like ours. He didn't speak right away. Then, it is. They walked back together, the basket swinging between them, the silence easy now. As they neared the porch, Julia ran out barefoot, her cheeks pink with cold. There's a man coming, she said, pointing. On a wagon. Talia stepped forward, shielding her eyes. A team of Duns pulled a freight rig heavy with crates. The driver, a lean man with a ginger beard, reined in and tipped his hat. Delivery from Cheyenne, he called. For a Miss Talia O'Brien, she blinked. From who? Returned Mark, says Miss Clara Dempsey. Talia's breath caught. She hadn't heard from Clara in over a year, not since she'd left the hospital work in Kansas. The driver climbed down and began unloading a spinning wheel, a crate of books, and a wrapped parcel no larger than a loaf of bread. Talia signed for the delivery and carried the parcel inside. She opened it slowly, revealing a folded letter and a small, stitched sampler with neat blue thread. To begin again is not to fail. Lachlan watched her from the doorway. She was my teacher once, Talia said. Before the war. You think she wants you back there? No, Talia said, running her fingers over the cloth. I think she wants me to know I haven't disappeared. That night they celebrated with hot cider and fried apples. Josie read aloud from one of the new books, careful and proud. Julia fell asleep on the rug, her cheek pressed against the sampler, even though she didn't know what the words meant yet. Talia stepped outside with Lachlan after the house had gone quiet. The wind was gentler than it had been in days. She pulled the shawl tighter and leaned into him. I want to marry you, he said without preamble. She turned toward him, heart thudding. Lachlan, I know what it means, he said. Not just the word, the work, the staying. She touched his jaw, rough with a day's growth. It's not just about being here, I know that too. It's about putting down roots deep enough they don't tear when the wind shifts. She nodded slowly. Then yes. He kissed her again, not like the first time this one held a promise. It lingered, sure and unhurried, a thing with weight and warmth. The next morning, they told the girls. Julia squealed and wrapped her arms around both of them at once. Josie nodded solemnly, then slipped outside and returned with her mother's brooch, a small silver circle with a pearl at its center. "You should have this for the wedding," she said, placing it in Talia's hand. They married on a Sunday afternoon, just after the first real snow fell. Lachlan wore his best wool coat, and Talia pinned her hair back with the brooch. The girls carried pine sprigs in their mittens and stood beside them as the preacher from Rawlins gave his blessing. Afterward, they ate stew and bread at the long table, the fire crackling behind them. Neighbors came by with jars of honey and sacks of flour, quiet congratulations and stories of their own hard-won loves. That night, after the girls had gone to sleep in the loft, Talia and Lachlan stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching snow fall steady across the pasture. "We've made something solid," she said. He wrapped his arm around her. "And we'll keep building." "One board at a time," she rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm not afraid anymore." "You never were," he said. "You just needed someone who saw it." Spring came late that year, but when it did, the land softened fast. The girls planted sweet peas along the fence line, and Talia's drying shed stood tall behind the cabin, shelves already filling with jars and bundles. Lachlan added a lean-to for tools and made the girls a swing from an old wagon wheel. In the evenings, they sat beneath the porch roof, listening to the frogs return to the creek. They didn't talk much about what came before. There was enough ahead to hold their gaze, and in each other they had found not rescue but recognition, two people who had lost, endured, and chosen to stay. And stay they did. Through wind and thaw, quiet days and lean ones, with hands that built and voices that never had to raise to be heard, together they lived a life that was not perfect but true, rooted, whole, and deeply, deeply loved.